We're now going to talk about quantum technologies for national security. And our moderator today will be Yaakov Weinstein, who is the Chief Scientist of Quantum Technologies at the MITRE Corporation, with over 17 years of experience at the company specializing in quantum information, quantum optics, quantum chaos, quantum error correction and fault tolerance, and limited diffraction beams. So we are delighted to have a terrific panel here. Quantum technologies for national security, and Dr. Weinstein will introduce the panelists.
Thank you so much. All right, so I hope
from up here.
Is that okay?
It's probably easier to sit because the videographer needs the...
Can't go against the videographer, that's for sure. All right, so hopefully I have the panelists here. Let me just get them up here.
We have Dr. Emma Mitchell, Bryan Switzer, Bryan Switzer, and Stuart Woods.
Yeah, Stuart unfortunately had to pull out.
Okay.
But if you don't mind taking a seat. Let me get my questions up here. So first of all, it's a pleasure to meet you both. Unfortunately, my goal for this panel was really to have representatives from all of the AUKUS countries, from Australia, the UK, and the United States. Unfortunately, our UK participant did have to pull out at the last minute. The worst thing about that is it's going to ruin my joke for the second question, but hopefully we'll be able to salvage it. So Emma and Rick, I'm going to ask you, as we start the first questions, I'll just ask you to give a quick introduction to yourself. What perspective you're coming from. But let me start with the first question. Hopefully that will get us into it. And Emma, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. We're all familiar with the fact that quantum computers, should they become sufficiently mature, will have the capability of breaking RSA encryption and all other types of asymmetric crypto. So that's kind of a given. But what other areas within quantum, what other quantum technologies, or what other areas around quantum do you see as national security concerns?
Okay, thank you for the question. So my background is I'm a research scientist, physicist with the CSIRO, which is the Australian Government Research Organisation, and we've spent quite a long time building capability in quantum sensing, particularly superconducting sensing, in a range of developing a capability for a range of applications, right from mineral exploration, medical, aerospace, up to defence and security type work. Under that sort of umbrella of applications that we've been working on over the years, the sensing, the quantum sensing side of quantum technologies is what we are most interested in, and where we've developed some capabilities. And so I think that sort of using whatever advantage you can get from your quantum sensors to improve on the current capabilities is where the applications are coming from. And for instance, in Australia, the Army has put out calls for quantum sensing applications from universities. People put up a bid of their projects and the like. And that's the sort of thing for looking perhaps underground or remotely, or gaining that extra depth of vision which has been developed for mining and mineral exploration, can be sort of translated across to, say, defence or security type applications.
Great. Rick, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Turn this on. Can't. Oh, no. Okay, thank you. Hi, yeah, so Rick Switzer. I'm with the Department of State's Critical and Emerging Technology Envoy. We look across all the critical emerging technologies, so AI, quantum, advanced computing, synthetic biology, to name a few. And so we come at it more from clearly a policy perspective and national security perspective. The Envoy was created quite literally to provide senior leadership within the Department of State for engagement around these issues. Quantum is one that we get literally every country on the planet now wants to engage with the United States on quantum. We have many joint statements of cooperation in quantum now. I think we're up to 20, I believe. We could have 75 tomorrow if we had the bandwidth. And again, sort of from my office's perspective, what we are trying to do is develop a strategic framework around these issues for the Secretary, for the National Security Council, and for our engagement partners and allies, particularly Australia and others are very, very strong allies of ours. From a beyond, post-quantum cryptography, what are the sort of specific issue sets? I would just echo what we just heard. I think clearly the immediate use cases appear to be more quantum sensing, quantum imaging. There's sort of quantum materials that have potential implications for stealth or for quantum navigation as well, which have massive implications for drones, for instance, particularly if you start talking about really highly autonomous, highly intelligent drones that will not require radio communications, where they can sort of be fire and forget on a mission set. Quantum navigation is the way you possibly would do that, so that is obviously something we are very concerned about. And then if you think forward to where you started at the beginning of the quantum information sciences, the sort of holy grail is a general purpose quantum computer that can do things. We think perhaps AI accelerators may well be some of the very first use cases where it's a heterogeneous machine where you're pairing it with traditional AI and you've got a quantum accelerator that can do specific things faster or differently or augment in such a way that could really advance AI. And that's probably the one as well from sort of the compute side that we are looking at really closely.
So let me follow up, and Emma, I want to follow up with you too, but I'm going to bother Rick first. Paint the scenario for us, right? You're at Department of State, right? How do you go to your superiors? How do you go to your management and say, hey, there's this quantum thing? Like, do they look at you and say, like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, how did you start that conversation? How did you convince them?
So 8 years ago, when I was a science counselor at Embassy Beijing, when I wrote about it, it was kind of like, oh, that's some interesting science fiction you're writing about there.
Right.
We don't have a lot of interest in that. I think that has shifted. We had the National Quantum Initiative. Mm-hmm. I think that starting in 2018, clearly there was a recognition, both in Congress and at the White House and the State Department, that it's an issue. Again, my office, the Tech Envoy office, has only existed since January, right? So quantum is specifically in our area of responsibility. We are responsible for developing a national security strategy that thinks about quantum, particularly from national security's perspective. Because there's a lot of basic science and wonderful work that goes on between scientists all over the world and pushing the boundaries of science, but that's not the role of the envoy or typically the State Department. It's more these other things we just discussed. So I think there is a much greater understanding. The real question is that, and all the smart people in this room, if we were to ask them when do we think the next big giant breakthrough for quantum is going to be, we'll probably hear anything from 6 days to 16 years from the folks in this room. And I think that's where the difficulty actually lies. So it's not in convincing them, it's where the sense of urgency is and where to put the attention now.
Great. So that really ties into the next question I was going to ask you, Emma. You're going to the Army, right? They've got things that they need to deal with now. They've got people they need to, they have people they're directing. They have logistics to worry about it. How do you convince them that quantum is a thing that they should care about?
Well, one way is looking at previous use cases. Mm-hmm. So perhaps like in mineral exploration, like I mentioned earlier, that you can show a track record there of having used the technology to benefit and where it's shown benefits over conventional technologies. Mm-hmm. Often it's a lot of trial and error, and you might have pitched multiple projects over the time for different sort of aspects of, say, defence or something. And it's one of the best ways that we've discovered of doing things is actually developing prototypes and doing demonstrations for whichever client you're looking for, trying to
show them good, show them bring them right.
Bring them out, show them. You can bring them to the lab certainly, but actually it's more successful if you take your prototype out to the environment that they're interested in and show them how that works. And I think that's a much better way of getting through to them the advantages of what you can do over what they're used to and their technology is doing that sort of demonstration in their environment.
Great. Is that a good lesson for all our industry people out there? Don't let them come to you. You should go to them. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you certainly bring them to you first, but they'll always think of it, oh, well, that happened in a laboratory, how
Right.
can that apply to our problem?
Right.
So you do need to, at some point, get it out there into their environment with their stakeholders, and also try to maybe not wait until you've got the most perfect system to go. If it's good enough to demonstrate, then do it sooner. You do have to make sure it's good enough that you can show the advantage of the technology, but you don't have to wait for perfection. And scientists and engineers are tinkerers, and they want to keep sort of perfecting, but at some point you've got to draw a line and actually get it out there.
That's great.
Yep.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, so now is my joke. So you don't have to laugh though, because the UK guys. So several years ago, my sister married a wonderful man from Manchester, England. And at the wedding, he talked about some of the challenges of dating and courting across the Atlantic. And then he quoted the famous remark that the United States and the United Kingdom are two nations divided by a common language. How do we speak? We're all speaking English, but how do we speak the same language when it comes to national security? We have different wants, we have different needs. Rick, I'm going to start with you.
I mean, that's a really difficult one, right? I mean, because national
That's why I
security
asked it.
is nebulous, it's hard to define.
Yeah.
It means a lot of things to different people. Sort of institutional theory would tell you that, DOD, because of the nature of where they sit in this sort of bureaucracy, they stand on issues in a specific place, and different countries look at it from a different perspective. I think fundamentally for like-minded countries, it seems to be the kind of and if folks who were at the dinner last night at the Dutch ambassador's residence, I think the things that came out when several ambassadors were speaking were that there are like-minded countries who have deep agreement around principles, around freedom, around how we view the world, and that there's a deep level of trust between those countries. And I think that in order to think through the national security implications of something, it really starts with trust, right? Do we trust you? Do we trust where you're coming from? And do we trust your intentions, right? And so that is, I think, again, why there's this sort of growing sense of like-mindedness around, and the importance of like-mindedness around these really potentially destabilizing technologies. We had several folks who were, leading scientists who've been working on this for 25 years, and they were just, astounded by the promise, and many of them ended with but terrified by what these technologies could mean if misused, right? And I think that's sort of the baseline that has to come again from trust among parties, that we're going to have each other's best interests in mind. And that's not always the case, right? It's clearly we live in a much more contentious world than we did before. There are nations that operate under separate political systems and structures that view the world very differently than we, our partners and allies, say Japan or Korea or Australia, the way that we collectively view the world. And that's sort of, I think, the base where we start with national security.
I think that the landscape has changed a lot in the last couple of years, and it has been difficult for smaller nations, I think, to collaborate, because it's usually we're the sort of poorer cousin type thing.
Right.
So I think things
The
like...
cooler cousin, though.
A cooler cousin, well, yeah, maybe.
All the beaches.
Apart from climate change, yes. But, things like export control, ITAR, do sort of, give you a bit of a cold shiver when you might have some technology that might be of joint interest. So I think there's still a bit of a way to go from that point of view of getting on equal footing. And I think more recently, with the new sort of change in global conflict and the like, that sort of might accelerate better collaborations and more equitable collaboration.
Right. So certainly, Rick, back to you there for a second. Certainly, the memorandums of understanding the United States has signed with all these countries, and I trust countries are signing with, nations are signing with other nations as well. Is states, are the intelligence organizations, are they aware of some of the challenges that are faced by this, global quantum effort? Do they realize that things like ITAR can really hamper some of what people here, for example, would like to do? I realize I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no,
I'm not blaming you.
No, I would argue that our restrictions are very loose in general, and that they're very targeted. So, I mean, if you look at what the world looked like, and ITAR, much of this falls, particularly the international regimes, because ITAR is a unilateral U.S. structure, right? So, rather than talking about the unilateral, since we're speaking sort of more broadly, I'll speak about Wassenaar, right? So, Wassenaar is the arrangement under which some of these things are controlled. You know, Wassenaar is basically was the least we could possibly do when we decided to jettison COCOM, right? And COCOM was an agreement we had for going on 50 years amongst Europe, the United States, Japan, Australia, and others, that it was important that these technologies had real implications for national security, for economic security, and that it was important that we maintain a lead, an edge, commercially, scientifically, and tactically is for weapon systems. And that when we decided to dispense with COCOM, we were left with Wassenaar. Wassenaar is very narrow, very specific, and it has to almost have a perfect correlation to weapons development in most cases. I would argue in the new world we're in, we're probably likely to see more, not less. That folks need to sort of think through a world where you have sort of these concentric circles of trust I was sort of trying to get at, and that there are sort of trusted countries based upon shared principles and values, based upon a trust that they do not have, they don't have ill intent towards us, and they will not use our technologies with malice against us and our allies. And so I think that there is going to be, unfortunately, the world's just not a perfect place. It'd be wonderful if this was not the case, but this is just how the world is. That we're going to have sort of greater collaboration, to your point, that more collaboration, I think, within the circles of trust, and increasingly less with those who have stated goals that undermine our national security and a different worldview about how humans should order themselves, the dignity of sort of principle around religion and speech and rule of law and these sorts of things, and then it makes it difficult with technologies that, as I said earlier, that many brilliant scientists said that the promise was so amazing, but they were all terrified of. And when you sort of have that dual edge, it's natural that folks will say, okay, well, clearly the things that you're working on with quantum sensing have direct implication for drones. We know at times drones are becoming more and more powerful. Do we want to make sure that the countries most likely to target our own citizens with those drones have just as good a technology as we do? Arguably, no. I think that's where the world is headed. Again, it's in a perfect world, we would all work together for the betterment of humanity, and we'd be exploring space. We just don't happen to live in that world.
So Emma, I don't like referring to Australia as the poorer cousin. The Australian ecosystem is, you said it, so I'm not going to agree with that description. Certainly the Australian ecosystem in quantum has been robust and has been so for, say, a decade at least at this point. But like, are you reassured? Like, no question that Australia has a population less than a tenth of the United States. That's a given. Are you reassured by the fact that the United States is not going to perhaps get in the way of some of these collaborations? Can you work with other companies, other industries, in the United States with full confidence that things are going to go forward?
Oh, I think so. I mean, Australia certainly punches above its weight per capita
Absolutely.
Particularly in quantum research and quantum physics in particular. Very strong contingent here from Australia. I think, I think there should be no reason that we can't accelerate that sort of collaboration. And I think in the new after recent events, that's going to happen just naturally, like as a force. In general, when you're working more in the security side of things, it does tend to slow down development of technology anyway, just by the measures that are put in place. And that's something that doesn't matter which country you're working with, even within your own sector, it ends up slowing down progress compared to if you've got an open research laboratory that's collaborating between multiple universities, or for instance. So I think it's just the nature of the work, and something that probably need to keep an eye on too. If there are big developments in the sort of open research community, it's going to be hard to catch up if you cannot partake and share in those collaborations.
Great. So Emma, starting with you this time. There are, as we've spoken about, there are adversaries out there to our way of life, to our countries, and specifically, what is your biggest national security concern in the quantum space? What are you most worried about?
Oh.
You don't have to be worried about anything.
Yeah. I guess just like a workforce, an educated workforce is something that we're struggling with, and supply chain issues, particularly post-pandemic. Australia, we were waiting 6, 9, 12 months for some equipment to arrive, and that's just like an isolation.
I'm having a hard time hearing in the back.
Oh,
so we
sorry.
can make sure the microphones are up. Yeah.
I think it's on. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I hear you.
Yeah. So supply chain issues, as I was saying, sort of high-tech equipment, we can wait up to 12 months for delivery for some of these things, and that's really impacting the speed of development and the like for us. And again, that's an isolation thing, I think, geographically. It's just
Sure. You got to go over the ocean somewhere, right?
That's right, yeah.
Rick, biggest concern?
Yeah, I think losing.
Losing.
It's that simple.
Okay.
I think not the U.S. and our allies, particularly general purpose quantum computing, not getting it first. I think that there has profound implications. And then secondarily, not making investments in, speaking of supply chain, in the ability to produce the things so that you have a deep ecosystem. Because there's a possibility, and we could debate how strong that is, that a fundamental breakthrough could come. And a lot of folks who are already developing quantum computers, believe that the systems they're developing now will help them design the next systems. And there's a pretty strong sense within the community that a real system will give you an enormous advantage to designing the next system, right? But there's a real possibility that there could be a massive breakthrough, but where you actually won on the fundamental breakthrough, but you lost on the scale up, right? The ability to then take the breakthrough and scale it because you lack the deep ecosystem, the art rather than the science of all the different kinds of firms that produce the pieces that make it work, and the workforce who can put it all into action. And I think that is one of the risks that we run, is that we in the United States in particular are very strong on the basic science side of this, but we have not made the kinds of fundamental investments that would build out a deep ecosystem of firms and others who would make the pieces that would let you scale rapidly.
So, Rick, what should we do? If you could, what should we do today?
Fully fund the National Quantum Initiative.
Okay, there we go. Everybody here.
Tell Congress you heard it here first. I would actually vastly increase it. I would increase the collaboration with partners and allies. I would increase, our attempts or efforts to bring in more of the best and brightest, to encourage people to come to the United States, Australia, to stay, to study, and to stay, to sort of join, this experiment, this 250-year experiment we have going here, where folks can come from anywhere. Their father could be a foreign student from Kenya. They could be born, to a single mother essentially, and they could rise to become president of the United States one day. I don't think very few other countries can offer that sort of thing. That we have the ability to bring in folks, and we don't do a good enough job. We sort of expected that we're so wonderful that everyone will want to stay forever, and I think we need to really look at how do we attract the best and the brightest, how do we make the United States more welcoming, and how do we keep more of those folks here so that they become part of our ecosystem.
Emma, what should we do?
I agree with Rick, of course.
You got
We've got similar problems attracting educated workforce. We have the additional geographic isolation issue as well, which makes it difficult. So that's, those sorts of problems are something that will hold our workforce back. And again, also having a large enough market for products or technologies that we develop. We are too small, and so we require sort of global markets to be able to enter global markets as well. So that's another restriction for us, I think.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. Please, a round of applause for our panelists.